All right, everyone, welcome to Autonomy Do It Live, week 3. It's already week 3 of Autonomy. I hope you guys have been enjoying yourself. We've been learning a lot these past 3 weeks because Richard has a lot to share. And I actually want to explore some of the topics that Richard brought up in those lectures as they relate to creativity and art. But before we get into that, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Muhammed Abdul-Ghaffar. I'm from season 5. I joined about late March, but I just wanted to explore, give a little bit of backstory. So I grew up as an anime fan and video game fan, and I'm also an artist. So creativity is very important to me. And my experience at public school was riddled with, I was very antisocial. It was hard for me to make friends. I've even been bullied. And so for me, for most of my life growing up, my respite from the dark things in my life, such as school and physical abuse, was video games and anime, Japanese media. And I also grew up in an Islamic household. And as a child, since I was like 3 years old, I observed that there were contradictions in my faith, that there were contradictions that the Muslims around me were making. And so I didn't have the answers at the time. And Islam at the time failed to give me the things I needed to have a more or less sense of self and spiritual foundation. And one work that has really defined my life throughout the years is a little known game called Kingdom Hearts. And Kingdom Hearts is a game that has a lot of spiritual and esoteric concepts. It's a game that combines Disney and Final Fantasy characters and tells a sprawling story about the conflict, the eternal conflict between good and evil. So that was a work that I always gravitated towards, meditated upon throughout the years. And anime has also helped me in being able to learn more about myself. So by the time I got into middle school, school still sucked. Middle school were the worst years of my life. And it was actually anime that inspired me to not only continue making art, but to form a community of my own. There was an anime called The Melancholy Haruhi Suzumiya that inspired me to start a club in high school. But long story short, anime, video games have helped me through the darkest periods of my life. And over the course of that time, I began to learn more about creativity and art, and also a lot of the things that Richard covers in his work. But enough about me. I want to open up to everyone else. So what has happened to you guys this week? Anything notable?
Well, I'll go ahead and jump in while everyone else is gathering their thoughts. Hey, everybody. It's me, James. I'm back again. And I'll relate what happened to me this week. It's been kind of a little bit of an ongoing saga, but it went public this week, essentially, that me and another autonomy student, or I guess I should say another autonomy student and I, are working on a new show that hopefully will fall under the Grand Theft World banner, that's going to be featuring some things that the main show doesn't on Sunday nights. And the big thing I've been dealing with this week is trying to get my head wrapped around how all the technology is going to work, as far as putting that show together and the hosts of the show being in 2 different locations, and basically just pulling it all off so that it ends up resembling something like we want it to look like. So that's been occupying a good bit of my time, especially the back half of this week, since that's when I tend to have more free time than I do at the front end. But yeah, it's been quite a learning curve so far. I don't think I've quite gotten to the apex of it yet, but I'm working my way there, and I can't wait to get to that point so I can slingshot on through and just keep on moving.
That's great to hear, James. Would you mind sharing with us what kind of show it is, or is that still under wraps?
No, I mean, we've talked about it a little bit here and there. So mainly what we want to do is we want to focus on the independent creators that are out there in the world who, may or may not be getting exposure on some of the other platforms, and certainly the folks that aren't getting exposure in the mainstream. So we're talking about musicians, we're talking about animators, we're talking about anybody who puts their time and their attention and their energy into creating something that they think is going to bring value to the lives of others, and especially the folks who may not have any other platform to get that exposure on.
That sounds like a fantastic idea. And as you were mentioning that, there's a YouTube channel I've actually been following for several years. It's called Archipel, Archipel, but they're a French YouTube channel where they interview Japanese creators throughout the Japanese creative industries. Like they've interviewed people like Yoko Taro. He created a video game franchise called Nier. Interviewed various comic artists. I think someone named Naoki Urasawa. He's a comic artist who made the story Monster, if anyone's ever heard of Monster. But that sounds like a wonderful idea, because when it comes to like the Disneys and Nintendos of the world, like the mainstream media empire, they had this $100 million marketing budgets to put artists in front of the eyes of so many people. But it's a smaller artist who would definitely benefit from something like that.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's one of those things that we need more of, especially at this time where what you are and what you aren't allowed to say is under such incredible scrutiny.
And that actually segues into a topic I want to talk about, and
You're
how
welcome.
it relates to me, like not only my lack of confidence as an artist, but the lack of confidence of a lot of artists, because there are a lot of artists out there that are very insecure about themselves and their work because they don't work at the Disneys and the Nintendos of the world. Because just as the CNNs and the NBCs and the CBSs are the mainstream media, they are the official culture. You could say that the Disneys, Nintendos, the Activisions are also like the official cultures of the world, like the official culture. And so something that I came to the conclusion of is that no matter how much money, no matter how much resources that a company has to produce art, at the end of the day, they're not the ones who get to decide what will influence culture ultimately. It's the people that influence culture. I mean, it's the people that decide what influences culture, no matter how much money you got. So I think of works like Minecraft, for example. Minecraft was a small indie game darling that came out in 2009, and now is like $1 billion empire that was bought out by Microsoft. Or a game called Undertale, a game made by one guy, and is still like influencing culture around the world to this day. So this actually also segues into lecture 3 about how Richard talked about how the world is a rigged game. And because it's a rigged game, there's corruption going on, and power is taken away from us, from the people, and there are bad things going on in the world. So you would think it'd be a no-brainer to sound the alarm on bad things that are happening, right? But the reality is that it's a lot more complicated and hard to actually sound the alarm on what's going on in the world. So I wanted to talk about art and its potential as psychological warfare, like using art as psychological warfare for good or evil. So what I want to go into was suppose somebody want to communicate a message to the world and they knew just how difficult it would be to sound off the alarm on certain issues. You cannot just go out on TV or on the radio and say, this is what's going on. So would it be possible for someone to make a work of art, to communicate through symbols, to communicate multiple meanings, to convey a certain message to their audience, and hope that they're able to use their critical thinking skills, their intellectual self-defense, to dive deep into the work, to decode what the artist is actually saying, and with the hopes of the artist inspiring future generations to take some sort of action in the real world, in the rig game, to de-rig it, if that makes any sense. So I think of a filmmaker like Stanley Kubrick, and he made a lot of films that explore various occult topics. Sorry, trying to get back my train of thought. Well, what I'm trying to say is art has the ability to communicate hidden meanings. And so because art can communicate hidden meanings, would it be possible for it to function as psychological warfare, either for good or bad, to say things under the radar with the hopes that other people will get the message and inspire some sort of action in the future? What do you guys think?
Good evening. I think the art was used to influence people. For example, in Poland, where I live, during the communist time, art was used by the government to indoctrinate and basically lie people. It was the tool of propaganda. But
in what ways, though?
From the other hand, there was also the resistance also used art during these times, hiding inside of movies, inside of books, the message to the people, that encouraging and showing how system is corrupt, and how people are lied to. We have many examples in Polish cinematography of this subject, probably not known to the rest of the, then it wasn't Western world. Polish people tend to call themselves Western civilization from last 30 years after the Iron Curtain falls. And before 1989, the only way for artists, for people to send message to the public was through the art. So music with allegories, parallels, and different language constructs to have people understand better how really system works. So many people was able by that to draw the value from that art pieces and get informed in some strange manner, but it was the way here. And in fact, a little bit is probably still is. But now with this culture, when we have like overwhelming information from all around the world, it's hard to dig out some of the precious informations about the mainstream and the establishment. Only the hip hop culture in Poland make the stand that they are not hiding anything. They are just giving us the direct understanding of this hip hop artist view of life.
So I apologize. So I don't know how to pronounce your name. I don't want to butcher it.
It's Marcin.
Marcin?
Yeah, Marcin.
Thank you for sharing that, because what you shared actually reminds me of a filmmaker. What's his name? Sacha Baron Cohen. Have you ever heard of him? He made a movie called Borat.
Yeah. They are. We are familiar with his movies. Yeah, but it's yeah. So what's your idea about this?
Well, I've never actually seen Borat, but I watched a video on YouTube exploring his work. And what you shared actually reminds me of, I can't remember which period in Iran it was, but there was a time where the Iranian government banned anybody from criticizing the Iranian government. So filmmakers would make these sort of pseudo non-fictional films that actually had like I won't say a hidden meaning, but a hidden narrative within these seemingly non-fictional films on criticizing the Iranian government. So I think it's very interesting that you shared that.
Yeah.
And I actually want to explore further this idea of art as like as a psyop, because like the mainstream media and the powers that be, they want to do everything they can to keep people small and keep us in a state of fear. And as Richard said, our potential is immense. Not only as human beings is our potential immense, but also as artists, because art is also within the domain of ideas. And just as there are countless opportunities in the world of ideas, so too are there countless opportunities within the world of art. There's a YouTuber that I follow. His name is Adam Duff. He's a senior concept artist within, like, he's worked on various kinds of films and games over the course of decades. And one thing he said in one of his videos is that the number of jobs for artists is probably the number of jobs there are for artists is comparable to the number of people that exist on this planet. So there are roughly like 7 billion people on this planet. You could say that there's probably that amount of jobs in the arts. But the thing with art, it kind of ties into Seth Godin's when Seth Godin was talking about the interchangeable part. As artists, we don't want to be interchangeable parts. We want to say something meaningful and provide something of value to the world, something original that no one has ever seen. So it's the job of artists to define to themselves what kind of artist they want to be. And Michael Nimitz actually said something very interesting in last week's Do It Live session, where he said that art is everything. And when he said that, it blew my mind, because as Richard says, because there's a lot of cross-pollination, Richard said that like art is everything that's created by the arm of man. So art does not only encompass paintings and films and games. Art is literally everything. Lamps, dressers, cars, political systems. Like, you can even say that the technocracy is a work of genius. It's actually commendable that these people have managed to outwit the billions of people on this planet for so long. And it's a work of art. Not in our favor, but nonetheless, it's a work of genius. So I like to imagine what could be achievable on the flip side. Like, what if we unleash our potential as artists to be able to bridge the gap between art and science and create things that the world has never seen before. Like the technocracy is an old idea, but it's only now that it's actually being able to be real, to actually exist. But what more could we actually make when we bridge the art and the science? Like, I can't answer that question because this is creativity we're talking about. Creativity is immense, it's limitless. So it's the job of the artist to define what is their offer to the world.
I was gonna chime in real quick. You hear me?
Rashad?
Yeah, how you doing, man?
Doing great, holding up.
Good. Yeah, when you talk about art being everything, sometimes I question, well, is everything artistic? Because like when you brought up the example of the technocracy, you said that it's really working in our favor and it's kind of diabolical, but it's genius. In the end, is that something that we could say is artistic because it's causing chaos and destruction? So, you know, can I honestly say that chaos and destruction is artistic? You know, like when I think of art, I think of something that reflects beauty, or you know, something that's divine and has a sense of something that has a sense of like I guess elegance, and something that reflects what's good and noble. You know what I mean? And like I forgot who it was earlier, but he was talking about hip hop culture, and you know, I get into conversation sometimes about like the current hip hop music being put out, and some people say, I've heard a lot of artists say, "Oh, well, they're just expressing their art," and but some of the music it has some of these guys just, you know, getting on a song or a beat and literally mumbling and saying nothing, and you know, talking about killing and destruction and drug selling and all that. So, you know, can I say that that's art? That's why, you know, when I say that, sometimes when I say that it's trash, some people get offended. But I don't know. I just think sometimes there should be a distinction between what is art and what isn't art, and you know, I think that's okay to define certain things as art and certain things as not being art. That's just my
technical interruption I wanted to do. John, I would ask you to take your phone out of your pocket and press mute, please.
Thank you, Rashad. I'm glad you mentioned that because what I mean by art, what I mean by art is artifact, something that is created, something that is made. So something can be made but not have really any, I guess, aesthetic value or beauty. And at the same time, not all art is the same. Like there can be like crude and crass art, such as the hip hop that you refer to. And I'm glad that you mentioned that because I grew up in the hood, and as a child, I never liked hip hop. But it's not that I didn't like hip hop, it's that I didn't like mainstream hip hop. Because growing up as a child in the early 2000s, not being on the internet, that was the only kind of hip hop I was exposed to until I started watching an anime called Samurai Champloo, and the music through that anime actually introduced me to the wider world of that genre. So I get what you're coming from. And even when it comes to anime, there is a lot of genre defining anime out there. So probably some of the best stories that you'll ever experience. But at the same time, there's all of this junk content, all of this sexual fan service that appeals to the lower self, which I think something needs to be done about that. But going back to what you said, when I say art, I refer to something that is made, something that is created, an idea made tangible. And it's something that can destroy or bring up. And I actually want to talk about the uplifting art, like great art, because the mainstream media, they do a lot of fear mongering, and they want us to keep us in a state of fear. But when it comes, art is powerful in that it can evoke thoughts and feelings in its audience, especially when it awakens feelings that the audience never knew they had. Take, for example, an anime like Attack on Titan or Demon Slayer. I don't want to talk too much about those shows because I don't want to spoil anything, but the point is that art is so powerful that it can even instill in its audience the no fear, the no fear experience, as Richard talks about. No fear, no fear, no fear. And through watching Attack on Titan and Demon Slayer, like the high points of that show, it evokes the feeling of not being afraid of death even. So I think it's very powerful for a great work of art to, for just a moment, to instill that feeling of not being afraid of death. Because the characters interacting in the story, they're also having to interact to the audience. So there's a suspension of disbelief going on. You have to buy into what you're consuming. And if a work of art is able to awaken powerful emotions within you, or thoughts, like higher thoughts even, I think that's a very powerful thing. Sometimes I imagine, what if there was like an antithesis to the CNNs and the NBCs of the world? What if there was like a media outlet that was the exact opposite of fear mongering, and a media outlet that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year instilled no fear, no fear, no fear into its audience, to not be afraid of the world, to not be afraid of death. So if you guys don't mind me spoiling anything, I'll talk about the Demon Slayer movie, for example, when I talk about the power of art to evoke feelings in its audience. At the end of the movie, well, I don't want to talk about the end of the movie, but basically the story of the movie is that a demon, like the heroes of the story, they had to slay a demon that has taken over a train and lulled everybody into a sleep. And the heroes are also lulled into a sleep. And throughout the movie, it explores the subconscious of all of the heroes of the story. And there's a character named Rengoku. He's a high level demon slayer. And in the beginning of the movie, he announces to his father that he became a Hashira, which is basically an elite demon slayer. And his father disapproves of him doing it. But at the end of the movie, he actually saves everybody on the train without any of them dying. And he dies in the end. And the last thing that he remembers is, well, not remember, the last thing that he calls back to is a talk that he had with his mother before she passed away, that he has to use his gifts in service of the world to protect the world. And in the end, as he was bleeding out, the last thing that he saw upon dying was an apparition of his mother showing approval of his decision, of his conviction in becoming somebody to protect the world. And so that movie, like, instilled me that, for that just one moment, like the feeling of not being afraid of death, of serving a higher purpose. So I do think that it's the role of artists to create art that, as John David Garcia puts it, to expand the awareness of humanity. But what do you guys think?
I think that by that the scenes that you described are good for growing people who would give up their life for some cause, and that for me stinks. Like, why would I take courage to, why would I die in the end? Why this is the deal? This is something that if you were calling one day soft power, that anime is soft power. And I think taking people to imagine themselves as someone who would give out his life to the higher purpose, it's something suspicious, don't you think?
How so? Suspicious?
Like, why would you give up your life for any cause?
That's a good question, and it is a matter of what kind of cost. So I wouldn't say that the movie itself was pushing a part,
like an agenda, like something like this. And also I wanted to maybe point some observation that I have in English language. The art is the name that we in our Polish language have. It's called Stuka, and you can find that Stuka it's very similar to the word sztuczny. And in English language, you have art and artificial. Artificial is basically the same what sztuczny means. Someone, some artists was trying to explain me that the main point of art is to make something artificial, like to imitate something which is real. For me, the person who is giving up his life for any cause, for any agenda, it's like a well-trained soldier that he will give everything because he believes in some higher agenda. So for me, it's basically mindless soldiers factory.
Yeah, I do see where you're coming from, because it is a matter of what cause are we willing to die for and, fight for. And like the movie itself doesn't push any particular messages, but I do see where you're coming from, because what honor is there in simply following orders if those orders are in service of doing something that is bad?
Yeah, the story that you described was about someone who was slaying the demons, yes, and saving some people, and in the end he is dying. So the next thing, it is ominous and evil, but I can see where it's going, and it's nothing good. That who are those demons? Who are those good people? And if someone would give proper or his own agenda, like the way it should be interpreted, it might be a kind of a weapon. So I would be careful with that.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah, and I think you're really touching on something there too, Marcin, because it seems like what it's speaking to is that thing that's within all of us that prompts us to go out and look for meaning in the world and to find it in our lives. And because it's something that is so integral to the human experience, it seems like that's one of the primary vectors that is used for manipulation. So I think absolutely, in line with what you're saying, especially as a person who would consider things a little bit more maybe than the average, that we would definitely want to, give a considerable amount of time in determining if that cause that we're putting our time, attention, and energy towards is actually something that is going to end up benefiting not only us individually, but also the greater whole of humanity at the same time, as opposed to just finding something that you can latch on to that appears to give your life meaning.
I think that's true, but I wanted to like stay in focus that on Muhammad proposition that or his not proposition but examples of those anime. Why would anybody give out his life in a fight? This is something that is, for me, it's strongly pointing to an agenda, an objective with this kind of art going into the mainstream.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
So what you got? What did you understand, and what else I can explain?
Just to run that back to you, the question was, what do I think about a story like this landing in the mainstream?
Yeah, what do you think about this?
Oh boy, I think I think a lot of things about a story like this in the mainstream, especially with the times that we're in, but anime as a whole, because this is something I've actually talked about with several people, and it's that like the more the anime becomes popular and the kind of content that it has, I have to wonder if there's any ulterior motives going on behind its popularity, especially with younger audiences. And as Hollywood, as the US gets more involved in anime productions, I have to wonder how it's going to affect Japan's politics as well as the politics of the anime industry. So that's still something I'm trying to figure out. But I'm glad that you shared your point concerning the Demon Slayer movie. But art, it has multiple meanings at the end of the day, and it's definitely something for me to think about as I continue to learn more about what anime actually is, what it's all about, and the creators are making this stuff. Because just as we are skeptical and distrustful of Hollywood because we're Americans, well, we grew up here. We also had to be equally skeptical about Japan anime, for example. But I'm glad that you shared that, Marston.
You're welcome.
So this actually goes back into bridging the gap between art and science, like the power of art and its ability to not only create culture, but to mold the thoughts, the habits of people and their behaviors. Because I like to bring up Leonardo da Vinci because he's a model in my life, because he's a polymath. He was an artist, but also an engineer and a scientist. And I listened to a podcast on a website called The Art of Manliness, and they had an episode on Leonardo da Vinci. And the person that was being interviewed, I believe his name was Jacob Isaacson, and he wrote a book about Leonardo da Vinci, and he talked about his critics, how they said that he should have been making more paintings and not learning about what the color of the tongue of a woodpecker is. But Isaacson said that sure, he would have made more paintings, but he wouldn't have made the Mona Lisa. He wouldn't have been Leonardo da Vinci to be able to observe the patterns of nature and to create a work of art that is timeless, like the world's most famous smile. So I wanted to talk about how our potential is immense as people, as human beings, but also as artists. So my question is, if more artists in the 21st century observe the patterns of nature, of how nature worked, what kinds of things would we be able to make today? Because just as there is a technocracy, it is a creation designed to undermine us. What art could we create in the 21st century if we bridge that gap between art and science all over again?
Well, I think we're starting to see some of it already, Muhammad. I can say in my journeys around the internet over the course of any given day, you know, I might encounter, say I encounter an article that has a video embedded into it. And then that video leads me to an audio file somewhere, and it just kind of keeps branching from that. You know, the person that wrote the article probably didn't intend for that. I don't even know what you would call it, but that data trail to, you know, emanate from that thing that they initially created. But I think that's also kind of the role that art ends up fulfilling in our human experience. Is it's a way for one individual to connect to another individual, even though they can't necessarily define what that thing is that connects them, so that they can both agree on it 100%, if that makes sense. So I think what we're likely to see as, you know, the technology that we have available to create expands going into the future is, you know, just like everything else, pretty much as far back in human history as you go, you know, the more we do something, the more we learn about how we can do it, and then the more technological advantages we're able to apply to it, the more something evolves into something that we've never had before. So I think we're starting to see some of it already. I think people like you, people like me, are starting to create some of these new forms of art. And I think we just need to keep doing it, even though, you know, maybe we don't see an audience for it that we originally envisioned right away. But that's kind of the whole thing too, is it takes time to make those connections. And that goes back to things like, you know, establishing rapport and trust and all of those good sorts of things. But yeah, I think there are possibilities we haven't tapped yet that are still out there. And it's up to us to go out there and find them and to show them to other people.
Thank you for saying that, James. And in a general sense, when I refer to art, I don't refer only to things of aesthetic value like films and paintings, but also anything that humans make, such as copywriting and marketing and sales and graphic design, because everybody is creative. Creativity is a thing that we all have. And over time, as you know, fields became more over specialized into their own separate domains, seemingly separate from everything else, like Leonardo da Vinci bridging the gap between art and science, I think that people should cross disciplines and find out the connections between their chosen field and other fields. Like, what about the relationship between copywriting and emotions or trauma? What could a copywriter learn from having understanding of deeper psychology of how humans work and being able to create effective copywriting that respects its audience, that doesn't violate anybody's rights? And but going back to Demon Slayer, like the more that I learn about anime and the more that I learn about the nature of art itself, the more I really start to think that just like I said last week in Do It Live, that intellectual self-defense is even more critical when it comes to art, when it comes to consuming art or art from another culture, because you have no idea what you may be consuming. And there are various domains of art. There's visual art, there is sound art, which is music, there's gastronomy, which is cooking, and there's the art of perfumes. It's artists being able to arrange and manipulate certain elements of nature to evoke certain thoughts or feelings in its audience. And the more that you actually look into how it all works, like how visuals, optics, like the human sensorium works, the more you start to think, wow, art is powerful, but it's also dangerous. And that's why it's so critical to not only to have intellectual self-defense and know what's coming through your senses, but to also have a standard for what kind of art will be permissible in your culture, within your family, within your community. I think that's even more important, especially in the age of the internet, where there's information coming from all directions, very liberally. You have no idea what's coming in. And as young people are growing up in the world with no firm moral foundation, then no true sense of who they are. At the same time, they're getting all this information. They're getting it from YouTube, pornography, films, everything, and they don't know how to discern it. They don't know what's coming through their senses and what they're accepting. So I think it's very important for anybody, any kind of creator, to have some kind of scientific understanding of nature, to understand what you're putting into your own work and how you're making impression on your audience, but also what comes through your senses, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely it does. And I think the other thing that speaks to is it's important for the individual to really have a good understanding of themselves and how they tick, the types of things that they're susceptible to when it comes to things like subliminal messaging and that sort of thing. Because we see so many of these elements, again, all around us every single day. And if you don't understand, for instance, that commercial that you just watched was intended to manipulate you in a specific emotional way in order to provoke you into a very specific action, then you're just kind of, at the mercy of the stream.
Yeah, certainly. And I've been an anime fan from my whole life, and I see becoming more and more popular, especially amongst younger audiences. But we have no means by which to filter out the things that we don't want or we think we're probably not going to like. And that is what concerns me as anime is becoming more and more popular, because a lot of young people have no idea what's coming through their senses. They have no sense of values, no sense of who they are. And we're all undergoing trauma as we're going through all of this at the moment. And there are a lot of people out there that don't understand what is going on with them. There are a lot of people that don't even know that they have trauma. So I think it's very important for us to have some more or less scientific understanding of the world and what makes humans tick, so that we can tailor the content that we make in a way that's respectable to other people.
Well, and I think another big part of that as well is being able to communicate all those things that you just outlined through that art, whatever it is that you choose to create. But to take these things that we learn, especially from the course material in autonomy, and share those aspects of intellectual self-defense with others, because again, anybody who's been through the public school system knows you're not going to get taught that stuff there, so that's why I think it's so important to be able to communicate those ideas to others in a way that is going to be palatable to them, whether it's anime, whether it's a painting, whether it's a song, it doesn't matter what the vehicle is, because something is going to appeal to somebody. But again, being able to pass on those things that people can do to protect themselves from the trauma that is trying to be visited upon all of us. I don't know if there's anything, as far as work goes, that's more important, not only throughout history, but especially today, like you say, because we are subject to it on such a repetitive basis, even throughout the course of a single day. We have to teach people how they can take care of themselves, essentially, because we've lost that. We're not being taught that anymore.
The information is out there, yeah, but it's hard for people to find it, being overwhelmed by all those, like you said, commercials and different, in my opinion, also anime, because when you have kids, you are around them, you are starting to observe how they are developing. Anyway, it was in my case. When I observe my children, I can see that even little couple of months old child, and even older 5-year-old child, 7-year-old, and then it goes 18 years old, 30 years old. People tend to just stare at screens that are emitting blue light, and it's that. For my daughter, which she's 5, when she see any screen, she tends to just stare in it. So if someone would play me everywhere I go, I don't know how it is in Japan. I never been there. Maybe you should ask Corbett how it is. But if you are influenced by this blue light coming out from screens, and when you start to see something on that screen, and you see anime, and that gives you rush and adrenaline and all those emotions that you are going through, the narrative and etc., it's normal that you will want more of that. So when people became older and older, they start to come back to this, because it's kind of an addiction, like people's susceptibility to emotions, something like this. But yeah, like we've been taught in autonomy, it's kind of a low brain respond. And when you start to ask questions and arrive higher somewhere, why I'm watching this, and then you can move through. And I remember this, that I asked my daughter why she want to wear Minnie Mouse skirt. She never saw that. This Disney comic, I don't know how to describe it, this cartoon about Minnie Mouse, this little girl with a big Minnie Mouse. So in fact, I've been told that once she looked at this Minnie Mouse cartoon for 5 minutes, and now the Minnie Mouse is top. When she sees anywhere in the shops or on anywhere, on the clothes, on toys, she wants the Minnie Mouse. Why? I don't know, but you have influence everywhere, and now it's harder and harder to pick it up, because it's everywhere. when you do not put yourself outside for time to time of different narratives that are coming to you, you can lose yourself in it. And you asked before, how was the last week? So for me, it was once more time rediscovering what I am thinking about life, because getting to know John Taylor's Gatto work, for me it was, to be honest, first time, because last season I didn't. I was working. I was using loud equipment, so I wouldn't hear everything that was said over there. And this time, the information really struck me that it was really a genius plan to use education and what goes with it, the things that the cartoons or movies that you are allowed to play to your children, because this is for 7-year-olds maximum, this is for 14, and all of these things were influencing also me. Yeah, so last week for me it was very overwhelming, but I'm trying to stand up straight and see what the future brings. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Marcin. And I think to end this podcast, just to tie it up into a neat bow, I think what we're all doing, regardless of what skills or occupation that we have, is creating a new culture. Because even though I've been brought up on anime for most of my life, even I think that things cannot go on the way that they are, because for too long, we've had no control over what comes to our senses or going through public schooling. So for me, I think like a solution would be to, of course, create a new culture, but to create our own media, and to create our own media that we would show to our children.
Isn't it an assumption that we because you said we aren't able to influence?
Oh no, I was just saying that let me rephrase that, but you're right.
Yeah.
I think I did make an assumption earlier, but yeah, we've just, we've been disempowered for so long, having gone through public schooling. No, and we don't necessarily have any, we do have control, but like the mainstream media, they're going to broadcast whatever they want to broadcast. So I'll say that the solution would be to create our own media if there's nothing we can do to stop it. We can do something about it, but would they stop broadcasting, doing the fear mongering? That's what I was trying to say.
Well, and I think you really hit on one of the big things that people are looking for nowadays, Muhammad, and that is solutions. And if you subscribe to the thinking that what the corporate media is doing is essentially putting people under a spell, then the only way that you're going to be able to counteract that is by producing something that is going to vibrate them in the opposite direction. So that by its very nature is going to have to be media. And if it's not already out there, then we're going to have to make it. And I think that's exactly what we're doing right now.
Actually, there was a filmmaker that I interned for last year. His name is M. Strange, but he's a polymath artist. He's made his own feature-length animated films entirely by himself, but he used to run a podcast back in 2013 called the Lonely Filmmakers Podcast. And on one of the episodes, he was talking about how people are fed up with food as genetically modified and filled with all these chemicals, and looking for more organic food and locally sourced food. but when will people demand that same kind of quality from their entertainment? So I think what you said was true, is that we have to create the new movies, we have to create the new games, the new shows, the new media. And I think that's happening right now, because now these corporations like the Disneys of the world, their new competition is some dude in his basement making the next Pixar film. So that's why I'm excited nowadays, is because media has been democratized and that there is new competition, and now we have the opportunity to create the media that corporations have been producing for so long. Because again, culture, no matter how much money or resources that these corporations have, like the Disneys and CNNs, like they're not the ones who get to decide what influences culture. It's all a matter of power, but they're not the ones who get to decide at the end of the day. What matters is what impression is made on the people, and they're not the ones who get to decide that. So I just wanted to end this podcast on that.
Before that, can I ask you a question? Who, in your opinion, should decide?
Wow, that's a good question.
John, you want to say something?
I was just going to say it's great, great topic with talking about art, and it's something I always kind of been struck by with a different in a different genre of sports. And there's the football players out on the field, the whole big group of people that are watching for them, cheering for them, and it's always kind of struck me that I'm just, I guess, more of a person who'd rather be out playing the game or out in the field or doing active myself, that a lot of times through media, art, or if it's all on consumption, the consumption side of media and content, but really I think the human condition, desire, or place is to be creating and helping, encouraging more people, especially with children, is to teach them to express themselves and to be bored and entertain themselves too. That my daughter recently has been getting into kind of writing stories for, and drawing pictures and stuff to it. She spent a fair amount of time watching some different cartoon series, but now she's in the phase, and I've been trying to encourage her and get her to that side of consuming and then creating her own ideas and stories. I think this topic has been great.
Well, thank you, John, for sharing, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I think in our when it comes to the mainstream, when it comes to art, because I've talked with a lot of people over the years, because I started taking drawing seriously when I was 15, and I like to tell people drawing is not hard. I think the most difficult thing about drawing is the mindset, because a lot of people don't learn how to draw, or they don't continue, is because they compare themselves to the professional artists that work at these studios, like the studios that are defining the current culture. And people see that as the narrative. Like, the narrative is successful artist equals person who makes the next Disney film. And anything other than that is not as important. So it
sounds like an excuse.
Exactly. It is an excuse. And, that's something that's held me back for years. And I'm really starting to unlearn all that stuff since doing autonomy, is because culture is a lot more than just what you see on TV or go to movie theaters to experience, and that you yourself are also a creator, and you just got to do it. And that's why I say learn to draw is more of a mindset problem than a technical problem, because most people never start because they compare themselves to those that are making the big box office movies and the games.
Yeah,
but you don't need
I will never be able to draw like that and things like this. Yeah. I will. Hey, look at this. I will never be. Yeah, Marcin, you should paint. No, I would never be because blah blah blah. Yeah, you're right.
So yeah, that's why I
Sorting
encourage
out.
more and more people. Yeah, it's just gotta do it. Just gotta create, and you can have the skills, but like what this is what Richard told me like in the beginning of season 5, and I told him that I want the skills of those artists, but I don't want to work for those companies. But one thing like that, one merit that is
contradictory, because you want to the skill of the artist. Maybe you don't need to work there if you just practice the yeah, because people copy the 16th century painters. They are able to copy them, so they are not around to teach new generations, except of that you have this art piece, yeah, and you can, with some knowledge and experience, you can read from that art piece and try to replicate, duplicate, and etc. So maybe that would be something. Or you can hire yourself, but they would probably hide the workshop their workshop from you, yeah, because it's something like there is very few people who would share like 100% of their knowledge with the apprenticeship to leave something for themselves, or they wouldn't been asked the right questions, the masters, because I also knew people who would share 100% of their knowledge if you would ask them the question, because they know they wouldn't take their knowledge to the grave. This is impossible. So the only way to share it is during their lifetimes.
I think like the similarities between the time of the Renaissance and these big studios like the Disneys and Nintendos of the world is that at least at those companies, they have a standard of excellence and you're part of a team whose goal is to make the best product. So I think just like with autonomy, it's possible to create a community of creators where we learn skills, but and there's the accountability, and we're in the community of people that want to create cool and great things, but you don't need to work at these companies to do that. You can have a community like autonomy of skilled creators, and we learn from each other.
Yep.
But thank you everybody for attending today's podcast. I know that we are 12 minutes over time, but I appreciate very much, and thank you for coming.
Thank you. Hope to see you next week.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, John, for sharing. Thank you, James. Thank you, Richard, Nick, Stephanie, John, Cody, Helly, Braxton, and Rob. Thank you everyone for attending.
Good job, guys. Have a great time.
Thank you. Night.
Yeah, it was good to sit through it.
Oh, Cody. Yeah, I stuck around. I didn't want to be the first one to leave since I'm the one who hosted the podcast. But how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing good.
Is there anything you want to share, perhaps?
Listening in the background, just I don't know. I don't feel like I have a whole lot to talk about, if I'm being honest. Like the sketching, sure, like I've done little sketches here and there, but and I have the basic skills, but I don't really have the desire yet to develop it into anything much more professional. I just don't.
I'm currently helping my younger sister get better at drawing, and I think the first principle to always keep in mind is that you have to have fun. It has to be play. And I'm reminding myself of that because, you know, a lot of professional artists, they follow the whole 10,000 hour rule thing, and they think that it's a no gain journey. And so by the time they attain the skills, they, you know, that becomes the culture. They tell others that it takes 10,000 hours to get there, that it's no pain, no gain, but I never resonate with that.
Yeah, it's definitely a balance that you have to tread.
Hello, Helly.
I was late, so I missed most of that. I was out and about, but I'll listen to the replay. I also like what you say and talk about a lot relates. It makes me think of my daughter because she is a lot in your situation and around your age, I think, Muhammad, and she has been very into anime and drawing since she was about well, since she's been drawing since she was little, but the anime around, you know, like 10 to 12, I think she got into Fruits Basket and some other things like that. I encouraged for her, but she always liked like Inuyasha and Pokemon and stuff like that before when she was smaller. But she didn't want to go to school for art because she was worried about being judged and the harshness of the teachers and things like that. But she's always had that, like, I can't draw, like, you know, she can pick up a pencil and draw something, and she's got like that innate ability, whereas if she practiced, you know, so I always felt like I was kind of encouraging her, but like pushing her a little bit too, because I could see that she had the ability, but, you know, it's something that you have to work and develop, you know.
Yes, definitely. I definitely see where she's coming from because anime tends to be stigmatized if you decide to go to art school, depending on what teacher you get. So I can definitely relate to that.
And she had some friends who are, you know, a little different or better, whatever you want to say, at a different level of art than she is. And so she would get discouraged by seeing their art, or like you say, by seeing, you know, the professional, like, oh, well, how will I can't paint like the masters or whatever. And then you get discouraged, like you were just talking about with Marcin. I think there was a little bit of that as well, but she does practice and she does create things, so I always encourage her.
Yeah, so I've learned over the years from various sources on how to get over my, you know, imposter syndrome as an artist. And that even involved having to jump into different artistic domains. Like several months ago, I took up doll making. And like I bought some books from an author named Susanna Orion, and she was talking about basically like the depiction of humans in art throughout history. And she was talking about how most art in the past, how they depicted humans was either impressionistically or abstractly. In other words, it's only recent that we began to depict humans realistically in art. It's still a new thing. So like, no matter what your skill level is, the work that you make is no less valid than something that is photorealistic. And even then, you can depict humans quite well in your drawings without having a super detailed understanding of anatomy. In fact, a lot of artists, like cartoonists and anime artists on Twitter, they're able to draw humans so well, like impressionistically, like anime art, but they're not that good at creating photorealistic art of humans, because that's a whole nother domain. So in other words, I told people drawing is not hard. Really, it's a mindset problem, because there's a lot of baggage to work through when it comes to growing as an artist, especially in our official culture. But I'm gonna go, guys. But thank you very much for attending the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having it.
Yeah,
I
it was
did
nice
my
seeing
best.
everybody.
First one. You too.
Good job. I'm gonna see if I can get brave enough to do it this season. We'll see.
We'll see.
Have a good one.
You too. See you, Cody.
See you, Muhammad.